Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our panelists discussing the respondent engagement disconnect, research design, poor engagement, and the decisions we make.
All right, everybody. So hello, and thank you so much for attending this session. My name is Kerry Hecht, and I'm the CEO and founder of Echo Market Research, HiveMind.Zone, and Spaces by Echo. This is the third time I've attended SampleCon, but the first time that I have moderated a panel, so bear with me. And before we start, I'd like to thank Rachel for making all of this happen, and of course, all of the sponsors. So as some of you may know, respondent engagement is a huge passion of mine, especially as it relates to how we build our databases and research design. And as the title of this session explicitly states, there's a disconnect, right? There's a disconnect in the value proposition we offer the people who participate in our projects, how we build our databases, and what we ask them to do. Being comfortable with the quality of our data obviously is important, right? And our industry is making some big and much needed moves when it comes to talking about this, but it's important that we talk about all the aspect of what impacts data quality, and some of it is how we treat our participants. So that's gonna be our angle for today. So before I introduce the panel, I'm gonna throw out a few thought starter questions, and they're rhetorical for right this second, but I'd like you to think about them as you sort of go forth through the rest of the conference. So a couple of them are, and this may actually, given the people in this room, a lot of you may answer this question, yes, but how many people in this room are on a panel or on any data collection company's panel besides their own, right? And what are the reasons that you think people should join the databases to participate in the projects that we have them participate in? And how has poor research design impacted a project or the initiatives that you've worked on, and how should we as an industry address bad design collectively? So what are the larger implications of not addressing it? And what things as an industry are we being unrealistic about, really, right? Or should we be more self-reflective on? So that's kind of the setting the stage for this. So now I'd like to introduce our panel, and I'm gonna go in alphabetical order of first name, so no particular order besides that. Deb?
Hey, thank you everybody for being here today. I'm very excited about this. I'm Deb Walker. Normally, she's going by first name, not last name, because I'm always last there. So thank you for that. And I've been in the industry probably 30 years now. I hate to admit that. Yes, I was 12. No, not really, but but most of the time I've been on the corporate side or the agency side. I've never really been on the supplier side, so I think I'm what you would call an outlier here. And I'm here to represent the voice of more the corporate side of things. And thank you. Oh, I work for Michaels, by the way, so all you crafters out there, shout out. I'm the Director of Insights there.
Elizabeth?
Yes, so I'm definitely much newer to the industry. I work at Echo, but I definitely have a lot more experience with sort of academic research in that world. So I'm kind of bringing that perspective a little bit.
Great. Mansour?
Good morning and welcome. I am Mansour Fahimi. My academic training is in applied statistics. For the past 30, 35 years, I've been in the survey research, market research world, helping clients to design and administer surveys. I'm currently Executive Vice President and Chief Data Scientist at the Marketing Systems Group.
And last but not least, Pam.
I'm Pam Cusick from Rare Patient Voice, and where we recruit patients and caregivers to participate in all types of research.
So I think we've got an excellent panel here bringing sort of a broad range of perspectives, and I think that hopefully that will make this conversation interesting for everybody involved. So we've got a bunch of questions. I've put them in an order that I think is reasonably logical to tell a story, but I'll let you guys be the judge of that. So the first one is a question for Deb, which is, how can sample quality and poor research methods make or break an insights department?
It's really huge. Right. Again, I've been doing this for 30 years, more on the corporate side than anything. And often you get together with colleagues, and sometimes you get to talk in a happy hour. And you might ask the question of, how many times have you been laid off? It's not if you have, it's how many times. So often, if you do not provide good quality insights that move the needle and can prove success, when you kind of come back around on it, you could be in jeopardy. Internal stakeholder teams will start losing trust in you. If they start losing trust, like I did what you said the customer wanted, it didn't work. If you do that enough times, then they stop listening and your team could be up on the chopping block. It's that simple. So when you're talking with those corporate clients out there, know that weight is on the shoulders all the time. So you need a really good research plan, a method to do it, good questions, and sample matches the target audience involved. We can get those right. So together, save those jobs.
Yes. Mansour, I think you might have something to add to this one.
Sure. I think it's important to remember why our clients engage in surveys. It's not that they have free money to burn or have nothing else to do. I think in a very simplistic way, we can think about it as they are in need of developing insights, and to use a cliche terminology, actionable intelligence that can enhance what they offer, and to have empathy with that objective as suppliers and as research partners.
And so, Mansour, the next question is actually pointed at you as well. So what are the main ingredients of a high-quality survey vis-a-vis the total error model? This was really interesting to me.
I think survey research scientists have provided a very effective framework to discuss that. Broadly speaking, you can think about components of error, of the total error model, to be things that have to do with the sampling, things that have to do with the instrumentation, questionnaire design, and all that, things that have to do with data collection, data processing, and eventually things that have to do with dissemination of information. If you unpack each one of these four pillars, you get to the various nodes and the smaller components that can creep in and chip away at the quality of the data and eventually intelligence that the survey is to produce. So paying attention to all these components is important. Oftentimes at conferences of this nature, it seems like focus is placed on one component and not the other components. But I believe that if you don't have that holistic approach and view, you can easily create weak links that can compromise the totality of what we put in front of the client. So my I guess, submission to this distinguished group is, let's have that total error model framework as the guiding lights, as the yardstick, and be mindful of the fact that bad data can come about in many, many ways. If your sample is not representative, no matter how sound the other components are, you're not going to get good data. If your questionnaire is not good, same thing. If your data collection process is not good, again, another weak link. And if the post-processing, weighting, imputation, analytics are not sound and buttoned up, again, you can end up with bad intelligence.
Yeah, I think that again, sort of looking at this as a holistic issue, that everyone in our community, whether it's corporate research all the way down to data collection companies, have to be involved in solving this problem. I think it's hugely important. So Pam, the next one we've got is for you, and I love your perspective on this because you come from the world of engaged people. You come from the world where the research participants have a stake in the quality of their life, and they have the stake in making their lives better by participating in it, which is often not the case in many of the other consumer research that we see. So how do you recruit patients, and how is that different from other panels in a way that those of us that own consumer panels or work with consumer research can learn from?
Okay, so we recruit in several different ways. We go out to patient events. So we'll go out to the National Hemophilia Foundation Conference or Sickle Cell Conference and meet people in person. So that's a little bit different than some of the other things that you might do. But what that does, when those people participate, they then share with their own communities. So not just, it's not just that one interaction, but they have a good interaction with us, and then they tell two friends, and they tell two friends, and so on. And so that's another part of our recruiting, is giving them a good experience so that they want to then share with their communities. And then we also have an internal advocacy team that reaches out to smaller support and advocacy groups. So groups that might not be nationally represented, but they're, they might be, in South Dakota, and they're a support group for a particular group. We have 3,000 of those partners around the world. So kind of taking the time to build connections with different groups is really beneficial.
Yeah. Well, and in the way that I'm interpreting that too is that if you end up giving the people that you engage with or the people that they represent a negative or bad experience, you lose that network.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yep. And it makes a big difference because,
Right.
That could be, especially in a rare disease area, that could be an entire community,
Right.
So we want to make sure that they have the best experience possible. And, then they'll want to come back and they'll want to share with their communities, which then, benefits us and our end clients.
Right, and ultimately that's a cost saving too, right? Like, so if they're advocating for, to get other people involved, that means that the price of acquisition of that individual that's going to be engaging is lower. Deb, you have something?
Yeah, we have actually our own in-house panel, and we recruit often, and happen to use Echo some for that, so that's our connection point. But when we're recruiting for this in-house panel, you can cast a survey, right, and make sure they check all the boxes that you're looking for within that group. But I think the biggest thing that really drives home, who do we accept into this community and who do we not, would be an open-end question, right, a really solid one. It could be, what was the last project, we're arts and crafts, right? What was the last project you made and what did it mean to you? And just see the passion behind it. And maybe ask them, what can Michaels do to make the customer experience better in stores? And as long as they're not saying, give me more sales or coupons, they give thoughtful information. Those are some of the best panelists when you can dig into that qualitative side of them, not just they check off ages and certain demographic, certain projects they work on, characteristics. So going that deeper level and taking that time to use open end.
And Elizabeth, so I'm going to point one at you this time. So the question was, perhaps some of our research methodologies aren't bad, but they're stale. What are the impacts of stale design?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple different ways to think about this, right? Like, I think it's important to think, am I designing research or am I designing questions in a way that doesn't fit with the current generation, right? Or the generation I'm trying to sample from, even if it's not the current one, right? So I think that's one way to think about it. And I think another way to think about it is, like, you have people in panels who are obviously doing surveys over and over and over again, right? And if you're designing surveys sort of consistently in the same way, because it works, right? Like, there is data and science behind how you design a question and how you design a survey. But you also have to think about that experientially, right? Like, if you have people that are continuously doing this, you have to keep them engaged, right? Like, that's the whole point of the panel.
Right.
And it's hard to keep people engaged if you're just giving them the same thing to do over and over again.
Right.
So I think, our survey designs can be great. They can be valid. They can be sound questions. We can actually be getting at the construct that we're trying to measure. But if it's the same thing over and over again, our responses aren't going to be good.
Right, and one thing to build on that too is the sort of changing demographics, like the demographic questions that we've used historically to establish whether a person is relevant or not, i.e. household income or college education for articulation or all of these different kinds of things. That's shifting. It's shifted, let's just say that. And we haven't really met that in an appropriate way.
Yeah, and I think that you can say the same thing for things that are more sort of identity-based or socio-political as well, right? Like, are your demographic questions about gender or race actually reflective of what gender and race look like today for people?
Right.
And I've seen a lot of surveys, and usually they're not.
Yeah.
And that's alienating to participants, right? They don't want to participate anymore. You've already offended them. You've lost them. So.
Right. So Mansour, what are the key differences between market research and survey research? And should panel companies tap into the survey research market?
I think fundamentally, market research and survey research are the same. Again, at the end of the day, the goal is to take a small sample and make reliable inferences from that sample that can be generalized to the population at large. Perhaps there are some differences in terms of the objectives of this exercise. Market research is mostly involved, if I can generalize it, in improving the bottom line for organizations, whereas survey research is mostly focused on developing inferences and estimates. And perhaps another way that I can distinguish between the two, and I hope I don't insult anybody, having been in this field, both survey research and market research for a long time, it seems to me that market research is a little front light end heavy. By that I mean not enough, if you think about that 4 pillars of total error, not enough attention is paid to the design and administration, whereas a lot of attention is paid to the back-end analytics and making inferences. In contrast, survey researchers are front-heavy, top-light. They spend a lot of time and resources, they waste a lot of time and resources on the design and administration, but typically they don't juice out all the intelligence from the data, so they are light on the analytical part of it. I think there is a huge market for panel companies to begin paying attention to the needs of the survey research industry. I've seen estimates of the global revenue for market research to be around 80 billion or so, most of it being in the US. I'm guessing that there is as much, if not more, revenue out there on the survey research, but they have more demand on representation, and they want to be able to make inferences that are more scientific and justifiable. But I believe at the moment, it's a very unique juncture that panel companies should take advantage of. Survey researchers are literally sick and tired of the traditional methods that they have been using for decades, which are not working anymore. Address-based sampling, telephone-based sampling, all sorts of fancy probability-based sampling. So they have agreed to come down, not that I'm the spokesperson for the survey research industry, but having been involved with many survey researchers, I feel like they are beginning to come down from their high horses and then tiptoe towards panel as a methodology for survey administration, but you guys need to meet them halfway. There is a lot more, as it was pointed out excellently during the previous panel, there's a lot more to representation than just gender, age, and whatever. So if you manage to improve the representation of the samples that your panel can muster, there is a huge untapped market out there. You don't need to reinvent yourself and become market researchers, as it was suggested yesterday. It is important for your staff to be educated about total survey error and the various analytical needs that the clients have. But again, you don't need to reinvent yourself. There's a huge market out there. Just make your panels a bit more representative.
Excellent, thank you. And so, Deb, the next question is for you. What survey methods can be used to improve engagement and reliable insights?
This is something I've really tracked for really 30 years now. And we all know that time and place, things have changed. It feels like the world has sped up. I don't know if I'm dating myself by talking about the little cartoon books that had the little captions at the bottom, and you'd flip through the pages and you see the action changing. In the beginning, it was like really slow, and now it's just speeding up so fast. We have to stay attuned to this ever speeding up society that we have out there. I read a recent CNN article, Very fascinating. Work by Dr. Gloria Mark. It was published in January, if you want to look it up. It's talking about the attention span of people shifting down. 20 years ago, if somebody had one screen that they're looking at, they would give you 2.5 minutes of undivided time looking at the screen and processing. Do you know what that is today? Any guesses?
40 seconds.
47 seconds. Yeah. So you think about those massive matrix or the kind of about 10 years ago, where we're trying to make all the questions fun and a little more engaging. Well, no, it's no more of that. You need to keep it processed short and sweet. They need to be able to answer it within that 45 seconds. You know, keep it tight. Don't have exhaustive 100-question list to select all that apply, because you're going to get muddied the waters. So that's one thing. The other thing that I've looked at over the years, I do a lot of attention checks within the data and the surveys that we do. And you will sometimes see, if you ask a similar question in the beginning and at the end, the mismatch. A long time ago, that 15 to 20-minute survey, probably 10 years ago, that was okay. Well, that is slowly ticking down. It's now, it used to be about 5 years ago, 12 to 15. Now, the sweet spot to get people's attention and good information coming back out of them is about 7 to 10 minutes. So if you're going over that, it's too long. They are not going to give you good information near the end. So that's one of the keys. And the other thing that people don't often do, they will not test all the questions and all the different apparatus somebody might be using. I think it's about 50% of people are using their smartphone these days to take surveys. If there's a question on there that doesn't function well on a smartphone, you're not getting good information. We've totally discontinued all drag and drop questions now because people can't do them on the smartphone. So those are some ways to get good information, tight questions, not over-belabored, and then short. If you have stakeholders out there saying, but can we add this? I think we all have that, right? I want to add this, I want to add this. You tell them no. You have to have the power to say no to get it to the point of where you need to be. Break it into chunks. Don't do everything all at once.
Right, and I think meeting them where they are, like to your point, even on a device, seems so simple, but we still don't do it.
Right.
Ellie, you thought you might have something to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Deb said most of what there is to say, but I also think, you know, I've heard people talk about breaking surveys into chunks over the past couple of days. And, you know, I was working on a project, and I remember a lot of people saying, like, you know, you give us 1,000 surveys a year. Sure, they're all 5 minutes, but I'm tired of doing 1,000 surveys a year. So I do think it's important that, you know, as an industry, we try and find ways to have multiple representative samples, that not only are we breaking these surveys into chunks for the same sample, but we're also breaking them into chunks and sending them across samples. So we're not putting people through a million tiny little surveys a year, because it adds up, right? People remember that. And I think now that sort of technology is getting more and more advanced, we have the capability to marry all of that data on the back end. And, you know, as technology gets more advanced, we should be putting the onus of that work on us, not on respondents, which is what we're doing right now.
So the next question is building on this and also pointed at you. So when designing research and creating strategies to increase engagement, why is the way we think or feel about the actual participants important?
Sure. I mean, this was definitely talked about a bit yesterday, right? Like thinking about participants as data points versus thinking about participants as people. But I think that, you know, it honestly can't really be harped on enough, because I see people talk about this a lot, and yet the perception doesn't really change, right? And you can't write a survey that's optimized for participant experience without empathy for the participant. And you can't have empathy for the participant unless you are thinking about that participant as a human being, right? Not just as a data point, honestly, not even just as a participant, right? You need to think about them as a mom who has 3 kids and a bunch of other stuff to be doing and is taking time, valuable time out of her day to take our survey, right? And it's like, the more that you humanize the people who are graciously taking our survey, even if we're giving them an incentive, right? We should still be gracious. The more you can write surveys or, you know, whatever you're doing that's optimized for participant experience.
Pam, you've got some stuff to add to this one.
Yeah, well, I think too, you know, building on what Ellie's saying, you know, we want them to care about the questions that we're asking and what we're wanting them to do. We have to care about them. And that is reflective in the types of questions we ask, the way we present things, and how we pay them.
Yes, agreed, completely. Okay, so Deb, how important is showing that you are listening, and in what ways do you as a brand do that?
That's powerful. I think anyone who's been in CX will know, don't ask a question if you can't be prepared to respond back, right? Or acknowledge that you were listening to what they had to say. That's huge. It's key within customers. You want them to know that they're important. When you talk about empathy for individuals, let them know that what they just said is valuable to you. Some of the ways that you can do that, it's like feedback loops. I know we have more in-house stuff that we do with database work of our own customer database and our community that we run. And the big thing that we do is letting them know what we heard and what's being done about it. Mind-blowing on that one of how that can impact a community or an environment for these people. They want to give more than. Even if you don't do what they thought you should do, they said, oh, you listened to us all, and I appreciate that. So that feedback loop. And then this is a humbling experience, but ask them how you can make the experience better for them.
Yeah.
Right? You know, it was very eye-opening. We put that in a discussion topic, and it's like, oh, okay. They said good things, like what they like about it, so you can emphasize that more. And then the things that, like, I don't really like when you do that. It's hard for me.
Yeah.
We cut that out. Listen.
So we had a VOC project recently that got hijacked by the participants, and it was a customer list. And one of the things that they kept saying is, you continue to ask me the same questions over and over, and you don't do anything about it. You know, but for the purpose of this audience, I think that that's one of those things that we have to push back up to our clients, right? That we have to say, you know, if you want to talk to a C-level person, you need to be prepared to tell them what it is about. Tell them, you know, potentially who the client is. Tell them what the results of the research are going to be used for, or what they are. And, you know, that's got to start, I mean, it should be starting at the top down, but given that it doesn't, it's got to start at this level that we push back up. And Pam, you've got some things to add to this?
It just went out of my head.
Yeah.
Sorry about
We
that.
can come back to it. Okay, so Ellie, next one is up for you again. So how do we make people feel like they have a stake in the research itself? Feedback loop is one of those things.
Yeah, so this is a part of the question that we were just talking about. But you know, my background is partly in women's and gender studies, and we do a lot of education on how to be an ethical researcher in gender studies, right? And what we talk about a lot is, like, you know, we are extracting things from the communities that we're doing research on, right? We're extracting value, time, information, all kinds of things like that. And you can't run a study in gender studies without making sure that that community is getting something out of it as well, right? So they have to be as involved in every step of the process as they can be. They have to have access to the results, and, you know, ideally it should make some impact in their community.
Yep.
And we can't translate that one-to-one to market research, obviously, but I think that we can take insights from practices in that field when we're trying to make sure that, you know, participants are invested in what we're doing, right? They have to have access to the results. And not only that, but the results have to do something for them, right? And this is sort of going back to that VOC project, right? They're like, you ask me the same questions 1,000 times a year and nothing ever happens. And it's like, you know, companies want actionable insights and then don't take action on the insights, right? And it's like, come on now, you know, the answer is obvious.
Yeah. Mansour?
I think the fundamental thing here is for us to design surveys that are ultimately respondent friendly. An excellent point. We shouldn't take respondents for granted. They are not at our disposal. They are doing us a favor by doing surveys. And back to what Deb mentioned as it relates to questionnaire. A respondent is not, a questionnaire is not like a luggage that you want to just jam in the last 2 pairs of pants or shoes or whatever. Every question, the answer to which is nice to know, would be at the expense of those that are must know. So it's important, perhaps sometimes putting your foot down with the clients who want to run with an arduous survey. We need to educate them that there is a strong positive correlation with, between length of survey and the rate of speeders, straight liners, and bad data.
And I will tell you from the customer's point of view, the client side, that's huge.
Yeah.
Do that. It shows your expertise and your knowledge of this industry and the panel that you have.
Yeah, I think that's hugely important. So Pam, I'm going to combine the next two questions for you. So,
Sure.
Because you hover between worlds, right? Qualitative and quantitative, and again, you sort of come from a very unique perspective, given what the rest of us do. And so, does your team, or so you pay patients $120, per hour? Do clients push back on that? And then the follow-up question is, does your team push back when something seems unreasonable for patients? And I guess adding to that, how do you do that in a way that impacts what's above you in the chain?
Okay. So in terms of payment, we get occasional pushback.
Yeah.
I mean, fair market value and all of that, which pharma, sometimes imposes. But, for the most part, I think people understand that the patients are the experts
Yes.
in what we're asking them. They know more than their doctors. And so paying them, they're paying doctors an awful lot more than that
Right.
when they're interviewing a doctor. So $120 an hour doesn't seem like that much when you think of it that way. And in terms of, the second part was?
Oh, so we had, does your team push back?
Oh, push back, yes.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times screeners are ridiculously long.
Yes.
And, patients will, they don't want to have to spend extra time. They feel like they're giving out all of their personal information and getting nothing back. So when we'll go through the screener, and if it's longer than 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is, they have to pay the patients for their time.
Right.
And we do that every time. It doesn't matter. You might have worked with us every week or, once a year, that's what we do. And because we value the patients, we value their time. Other times, there's some time that we'll have, methodologies that come to us. An example would be with patients with movement disorders, and they needed to be, with their face within a box in a screen. They couldn't do that. And so we went back, the project manager looked through everything, went back to the client, our client, who's the, not the end client, to say, look, this isn't going to work for these people. What can we do to make it different?
Yep.
And I think that, we do that all the time.
Yeah.
Because we feel like we want to protect our patients. They are important, they're what we have, right?
Yeah, right.
And we want to make sure that they're happy. They don't feel like they're being taken advantage of. They're not asked to do something that is awkward or uncomfortable, because they come to us and trust us.
Yeah.
We have to have their back.
I think that's so interesting and something that we should be applying sort of more across the board. I think about some of the longitudinal quantitative stuff that we see, which are excessive diaries or excessive journaling or things like that. And and we're screening for demographics as opposed to screening for behaviors that would be indicative of them being able to successfully complete that project. Like, are you already tracking your sleep or fitness or whatever? And so I think that there's definitely something to learn from that. And one of the things that we've seen often too is when you ask a client how long they think it's going to take a participant to complete it, they answer it and how long it took them to write it. And it's if it's a journaling exercise, basically they're just copying and pasting the same thing, and you're like, so that took you 10 minutes, but this is going to take a person, way longer to complete it. So it's just that sense check of what are you asking them to do.
You also have to think of who they are, right?
Yeah.
So if you have mobility issues, it may take you longer to type. It may take you longer to do things, and you have to be sort of understand who you're trying to talk to and who you're getting information from.
Yep.
And value them and value their time.
Yeah, and that shouldn't extend to just people. It should extend to everybody.
Oh, of course, absolutely.
Yeah. So this is a question that I wrote, but Mansour said you'd answer it for me, so thank you in advance. So how has the landscape changed for survey taking, qualitative research, and just sort of market research in general?
I think there are two factors that come to mind. Number one, as Deb mentioned, attention that survey respondents are willing to offer us is deteriorating in the age of texting and abbreviated messaging. The days of long and arduous questionnaires are really over. And again, sometimes we have to put our foot down and educate the clients that you're not doing yourself a favor by having an arduous survey instrument. And then related to that is, again, it's a well-established pattern that response rates are declining. This is not unique to any geography, to any topic. It's unfortunately a growing problem that we need to be cognizant of, because as response rates continue to decline, even if you start with a representative sample and you have done everything correctly, when you end up with a 1%, 2% response rate, you can't claim what you have ended up. That pool of respondents can effectively speak for the population that you're trying to make inferences about. And don't be don't put too much stock in your analytical skills being able to compensate for all the issues that have happened. There is a limit to what analytics can offer.
Yeah, very good. And so, Ellie, what are some things external to market research that we're now competing with?
Sure. I mean, you talk about this a lot, but I think the gig economy is what we're competing with, right? There are a million ways to make money on the side or full-time in a more non-traditional way that both pay better and are much more fun, right? Like taking surveys sucks, and it shouldn't. It doesn't have to, but if you're an Uber Eats driver, you can listen to your own music, you can bring your girlfriend along, it's not only are we competing from a financial point of view, we're also competing experientially.
Right.
And the more that we keep that in mind, the more we can actually be a competitor, because right now we're not. And I think we can see that from, declining response rates, from the conversations we've been having for the past 2 days, right? Like we are getting beat out. And there are ways to remedy that if we all agree to do it together, but that's a big if, so.
So in one of the things too, the panels are aging out, right? They're getting older and older and older. So when it comes to brand engagement, what is relevant to younger audiences? Deb?
We often look at those that are 29 and younger. It's a different crowd. We have to treat them very differently in how we seek to study what they do. Traditional surveys for us have not worked that well. Sometimes we'll do some pop-up, through text. Hit them through the text line and ask them to do a little video diary, quick, like 3 minutes. They're inside a store, we might geofence them, and then just catch them on there. Tell us what you think about, that area of the store. So we're doing it a little bit differently. They definitely want to feel there's a voice out there too. Like if you're gonna say you're gonna do something, you need to stand behind it. We did a little bit of a digital ethnography for the youth buyer in our stores. It just happened to be Pride Month, and so we had a selection of apparel out. And you can hear them on the video like, okay, so you're trying to make money off the month. Okay, fine. And then they read at the bottom, 10% of the proceeds off of this merchandise will be going to this community. And it's like, oh, then they're starting to shop for it. So stand behind what you say and what you mean, because that's going to be huge for this group too. Keep it short and sweet, how they're used to being talked to. Smartphones are great, and show that you're listening.
And Ellie, as the youngest person on the panel here, what have you got to say to that?
I would honestly say something pretty similar, right? Like I would say, think about how the generation you're targeting is already using their phone, right? And if they're making TikTok videos all day, give them a video question, right? Like this isn't rocket science. But I also think, you have to think about what do these people care about, and you need to cater to that, right? So if you're asking them questions that they're like, this doesn't make sense to me, or I don't really care about the result, even if it does make sense to me, why would I put any effort into responding to that,
Right.
even if you're paying me? Because,
But I think you also have to ask them. We can think about what they want or what we think they want, but, ask them what they want. We offer, patients can respond after every single survey, after every interview. How was your experience? What did you like? What did you not like? They don't like that they disqualify, right? You know, I have this disease, how can I disqualify, right? But we all know there are lots of reasons why they might disqualify. But, you know, thinking about that, okay, well, what can we do about that? We can't make them qualify, but we decided, well, we'll put them into a pool to, you know, be in a raffle to get a $100 gift card every month. And that made it less painful for them. And then it makes them want to come back, because there are people who are like, look, I disqualified 5 times, I'm never doing this again.
Right, of course.
And we don't want to lose them. We can't afford to. So like hearing them, it's one thing to put that out there and say, hey, what do you think? What do you feel? But actually then looking at it and then taking some action on what they said is really important.
Well, and I think that the disqualification thing is a huge issue, right? And so in the sense of, our industry doesn't want to tell them where they disqualify, because the assumption is they're going to go back in and cheat to match it, which I think is a flawed way of thinking and a terrible foundation for building a relationship with your participant database, the community that you're supporting, and so on and so forth. And I think that that's really relevant. Like, we need to check ourselves, because our screeners are meant to catch them in lies, and then they lie and we're surprised. And that's, a thing, right?
Well, we encourage them to go back to our project managers if they disqualify, to say, can you tell me why?
Right.
And that, again, it builds trust. It makes them want to stay in our panel, and then they come back and do another survey.
Well, and if they understand, what we've found in talking to participants is, if they understand why you are actually needing them to be a certain thing, they are a lot less likely to lie about it. And so the one other thing that I wanted to add to this is, if you think about the way the younger generation interacts with brands, it's very different than how it was when we were growing up, through influencer culture, through the way that they can engage with brands on TikTok, or the way that they can make money with brands by gaining followers on social media, and so on and so forth. And that's something I think that we all need to be very aware of as well, which is another thing that we're competing with. So we've got 0 minutes. Go ahead.
Sorry. It's a trivial detail, but it's important to remember that when it comes to younger cohorts, as you all know, they are hardest to recruit and easiest to lose.
Yeah, right. Of course. Yeah, it's like I can find you anyone to talk about anything for 15 minutes, but what you do with them in that 15 minutes is going to determine whether they stay for the 16th minute. So do we have any time to open the floor to questions? I know we're at 0. Okay.
Yes.
Anyone have any questions for our illustrious panel? I can't see anything.
Yeah.
I got a question over here. You were talking about how response rates are constantly dropping, and you seem to be thinking about that as a percentage. To what extent have everyone and their mom sent us emails soliciting feedback? All of our clients are putting the voice of the customer at the top of their insights strategy. So how do we as an industry maintain response rates if there's so much more feedback being asked for? Are people taking the same number of surveys, but they're just being asked for 10 times as much as they were 10 years ago? How do you guys think about that?
That's a great question, and to be perfectly honest, I don't know. I'm from an industry perspective. Does anyone else have any?
Well, I can say that, unfortunately, by definition, we don't hear from the non-respondents or those who break off. So there is very little known about them. Just about the only thing that we can extrapolate is when you have a panel that is rich in profile data, you can do some kind of post-mortem and see what are specific characteristics of these non-respondents. Is it an education issue? Is it a race ethnicity issue? What is it? And therefore, in future surveys, be sensitive about those parameters.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing about this is, everyone in this room to some degree is a competitor, right? But I think that if we can put that aside for a minute and work collaboratively to understand this better, right? I mean, I think we all have enough information to know that if a person is a member of one panel or qualitative database, they are very likely to be a member of many more. I think the average is 7, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that. And so, if we come together as an industry to not just put together a participant feedback loop that is something that is consistent across the companies, that we can then start really putting data behind the impact that bad design has, but recognize that we all have to solve this problem together, that we can get a better answer to that question, right? And then that gives us something that we can act on.
I have a question about one of the things that I heard a lot during this panel was about really thinking about the survey taker as a human being. And what I didn't hear much about was, except for perhaps when we were thinking about patients, I didn't hear much about reaching populations that may have lower literacy rates or may not speak English or may prefer to complete a survey in a different language or other alternative methods to collect that data that don't require that somebody sit and read, right? For example, I'm from NORC at the University of Chicago, and we also have panel surveys, and they are nationally representative. And one of the things that I think sets our panels apart is that while they are surveys, we do face-to-face interviews with people, and we also do phone calls, and we also provide the opportunity for participants to complete surveys in languages other than English. And so I just kind of wanted to hear a little bit more about that, because we do know that there are certain segments of our population that are growing really quickly that may prefer to fill out surveys in a different language, and I think that's kind of hasn't been necessarily, from what I've heard, been part of this discussion, and I think that we should be thinking about it.
Well, sure, and I mean, and it should be a part of every discussion, right? And so I think from my perspective, so and I'm going to speak on your behalf for just a second as well. So we believe and use an active recruitment model. So it relies less on people that are registering in our database because they want to take surveys, and more on finding people in a way that validates the behavior that we're looking for. And as Deb is of course a corporate researcher, but most of the rest of us are on the data collection side, right? So we get screeners that are already written, the surveys that are already written, and we make recommendations, and sometimes those recommendations are heard, and sometimes they're not. But if you rewind to pre-internet days, surveys were administered on the phone, surveys were administered face-to-face, surveys were administered through intercepts in the mall. And they could, depending upon what target you were looking for, whether it was a group that needed to do research in language, instead of trying to have them in your database, you actively go into their communities and find them. So that is the model that we use, which I think is similar to what you have to do when you're dealing with small groups of people who have rare diseases and whatnot. But I think that I don't think that this is a function of a lot of the times as data collection companies, we get what we get, but our model is such that we aim to meet people where they are. And I think that there's an opportunity for everyone in this room to do the same thing. But it really does come down to the sponsors of the research. And I think that there's a lot of evidence that suggests the needle is moving in a direction where they're not asking a bunch of middle-aged white people to decide what young LGBTQ people want to wear on their feet, right? So there is that is changing as the younger generation becomes more in charge.
I'm gonna add one little tiny thing to that. So, we do get what we get.
Right.
But, when we have patients with low vision, for example, and they'll come back to us and say, yep, I'd love to do this, but my screen reader isn't reading this for some reason. That's when we'll go back to our client to say, look, this is what's happening. You want people with low vision?
Yeah.
You need to find a way to fix this. And so part of it is on us to have the strength of whatever it is, to go back and say, look, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
We need to figure out a new way to do it
and
make that right for our participants.
And it's absolutely correct. I mean, so if we get requests from clients that are unrealistic, let's just say first generation immigrants in language that you want to conduct through a database, it doesn't exist, right? So you have to go into the communities with the appropriate person going into the community, asking the questions in a way that is meaningful to them. But this is there's lots of people in our space who are trying to solve for this problem, but it's also a top-down research design issue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This has been a phenomenal session. Can you guys, is this on, guys? Okay. So, and we can keep talking. I just want to jump on and just let everybody know that the collaboration labs are starting.
Okay. Yeah.
So we can keep talking. I know that this group is happy to have conversations. And it's an important topic and really critical in kind of tackling some of the challenges we're having. But just so everybody knows where the collaboration labs are, One is in the Plaza Meeting Room, that's a future focus, and the other is in the Pavilion, which is Let's Get Personal. They're both just outside our general session space, and there are snacks outside if anybody needs to refuel a little bit. But I'm happy to let you all keep.
Oh, I mean, if anyone doesn't have any questions, all I had was
We have a
saying-
question, Rachel.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yes.
Hey, guys.
Hello.
So this is sort of the bomb throwing question. This is such a great panel, great folks who have said really amazing things. This panel is also sort of the same panel we've had at SampleCon 1, at the 2008 CASRO conference, all the way going back. And there's been a recognition almost since the beginning, because online research was looked at so negatively. Particularly at the beginning, respondent engagement was a key priority, and some other elements of sampling to the best ability that you could were put forward. Sometimes successfully, sometimes not. So the question is, what's changing? Why, if doing it the right way, and it is the right way, produce such a great result, why aren't companies doing it the right way?
Because they don't want to pay for it.
Well, but that's the thing is,
But that's the
from
answer.
a business perspective,
Yeah, but that's the answer.
if it was such a negative impact and they were getting a better impact, then you would, I think, see different behavior.
Well, so at the end of the day, there's a phenomenon which is called good enough, right? And good enough was first seen when we moved from when people started having caller ID and no one was answering the phone but little old ladies. And we accepted that as good enough. And then we moved online and we built our databases not in a way that was seeking out people for specific demographics, but inviting them to earn money. And then that became good enough. And then we had the rise of DIY software companies, which eliminated a lot of agencies, but it was quicker, faster, cheaper, and that became good enough, right? And so this is, I hope that this isn't a conversation that we're having 10 years from now, but I'm sure there will be.
But what's going to change things? And again, if people are making bad decisions,
Well, I mean,
at some point they're going to stop doing it.
So exactly. So what's going to change things for the audience in this room is that the model isn't going to be viable anymore, because you've got synthetic sample, you've got AI that can process big data in the ways that it didn't before. But the bad design, bad decisions has to be something that is talked about more, which it's not, right? It just isn't. We don't talk about the bad decisions that are made based on bad research or bad data quality. But it's got to be, again, it's got to be something that the corporate researchers are invested in, that the panel companies say no to bad research, that we do more fraud mitigation, that we do more active recruitment models. But if everything is driven by price, we're stuck.
I think
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think now also that we're able to find fraud more, easily, or we know more about it now than maybe we ever did. I think that, bringing that out into the open and sharing, like, we use Research Defender, and so, they can go through and say, okay, this guy, somewhere, did 300 surveys in a day, whatever it was. That's pretty amazing. And when you can bring that back to your client and say, look, because we do all these things, because we recruit in person, because we, spend an inordinate amount of time trying to prevent fraud, this is why our prices are higher than somebody else's, and you're going to get good data because of that. And
So you're going in a direction that I like and that I think is critically important. But the other element there is there's got to be some differentiator. And we've tried in the past, so True Sample, there's been other elements that really have tried to identify what's good, what's not good. There have been things that scored surveys to say it was good, it was not good. There have been all these other things, except for there's a co-opting element that comes out. And what I mean by that is, let me use the SMR 28, which I think the intent was good, but it's become a marketing exercise as opposed to a real differentiator. And when these companies realized that their clients were the panel companies and others, there was an incentive not to be too harsh on what the bad stuff was. That's how they were making their money. And so I'll leave this up there. I think we need to figure out how we don't have this conversation beyond irrelevancy in 10 years and how we actually move it forward and make it meaningful.
Well, there has to be, so some of the things that the Insights Association and SMR are working on are things like Respondent Bill of Rights, right? And again, creating a feedback loop about participant experience that is systemic so that we can have the information to take back to the clients to make the business case, right? So if you need 1,000 people, but you have to scrub 60% of it, you're paying for something that is useless. So it's making that business case, but again, it isn't a problem that I can solve solo, that you can solve solo, that anyone on this panel can solve solo. This has to be something that the industry comes together on.
But the industry also has to say, these are, they have to be, have some courage and actually say, these people are doing the things badly.
Well, there has been talk, and I hope that it continues, about starting to grade, and you mentioned this before, but grading bad research and starting to charge people if they're going to abuse the panel, if they are going to do research that is bad design, takes too long. Because if you think about it, you're renting something from someone, right? And if you abuse it, that person leaves, that cost of acquisition goes up. So starting to penalize companies and researchers that are ignoring what we know to be true.
But that only works if you have a common sample.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I agree with that at all.
If they have a panel themselves.
Well, not if no. I mean, I think that you can look at, if we've got clients and we're asking our participants to grade the experience they have, we can see that. And if I work with, any one of the panel companies and we do something collaboratively, then we start doing that. We can start in a place where we're looking at industry categories, high engagement categories, mode of delivery, mode of finding the person. I mean, so there's a lot of solutions, but there is no one answer to your question, and I'm pretty sure you know that.
Of course I do.
If I can add to that.
The problem is I'm trying to push us to trying to get towards
then push
the answer, because
push up.
We have in fact, discussed this a lot in the past, and I really want I want us to start actually doing something, because I think we actually know the answers.
We do know the answers, and we've known them for a long time.
Correct. And
part of it is us being brave enough to go back. When we hear from respondents who say, this took too long, this didn't work, this blah, blah, for us to not be afraid to go back to our clients and afraid to lose the business or offend them and say, look, this doesn't work.
It's political, and you know that.
And that's where the courage comes in. I have doubts, just to be brutally honest, that we're courageous enough to do that at this point.
Well, I think that's why we're doing this, right?
If I may add to that, there are some evolving factors and challenges that we have to pay attention to. One is the fatigue that is setting in.
Yeah.
Taking a survey is no longer a novel thing. It's arduous, especially as household.
I'm sure that's been the case for a long time.
But it has, people are taking more surveys, so the novelty is wearing out. And as telemarketers increase in their activity, it adds to the burden. And the other thing is, there is a growing concern about security.
Right.
When you call somebody ad hoc and you start asking a whole bunch of questions, some of which may be very intrusive and sensitive. So there is that challenge to be paying attention to as well.
Yeah, but nothing that you're saying is inaccurate or incorrect, and it does take courage, but again, it also is because of the political component of it, and this is where I actually genuinely feel, because I've been yammering on about this for a decade too, right? And that the needle is moving because the viability of the companies who are providing the people is diminishing, right? Because they are competing with TaskRabbit, they are competing with Uber, you don't have young people in the databases anymore. So at what point does that become so problematic that that we're shifting to synthetic sample, right? So there's going to be alternatives to that are starting to become mainstream now that will change the viability of these business models.
So I'll leave that there. I don't want to keep pushing. It's been a good discussion, but
oh no, I love it.
Again, this is something I just don't want to be discussing in 10 years.
Well, then let's introduce ourselves afterwards and let's see how you can get involved in some of the stuff we're doing.
Sure.
All right. Oh,
Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Why are you talking about courage coming back to the client?
Yeah.
Show your expertise. Come back to us. We want to get better insights. We want to save our jobs. I already told you how crazy it is in the corporate world out there. So if you see something that we're doing wrong in this DIY world, like we're making our survey, programming it, and you look it over and you're seeing something that's going to be a disconnect, speak up. That's valuable.
Yeah, we've been afraid of that.
Oh, don't
Yeah, as an
be.
industry.
Do not be, because I will value you a whole lot more if you come back to me with that. No doubt. We want good information to be able to give to our internal teams. And as far as spending more, budgets are so tight. I will tell you, I scrap and fight every day to get a couple thousand more dollars for something. So it's hard to break through to the C-suite and say, hey, I need more budget to get it right. That's just a tough thing out there. So trying to maximize what you can do in the best way possible.
Awesome. Anyone else? Great question, by the way.
Great.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.